That it's just a sign of of the times, right? When a little kid wants to make a face shield, everything's fine. All right, so I gave y'all an article to kind of read briefly. If you'll grab one of the green sheets, it's on this next to last row right there. And this is kind of a follow-up to our conversation on Thursday about what power is, what power isn't, and how we use it. And so as you read this article about Pope Francis, who is Pope Francis?
Pope of the Catholic Church.
The Pope of the Catholic Church. What are some things that stood out to y'all when you think back to what power is and the 5 power bases? What are some connections that you can make from this article to power? Just kind of off the top of your brain, any connections you see to power?
Well, I mean, it's literally about power and like the different types of power. So it's really focusing on how like the Pope has indescribable like soft power over the nation rather than like Putin, who has to like, oh yeah, I'll bomb you. I don't know. In my mind, he's got referent power.
So soft power, they refer to Pope Francis's power as soft power. And so Ashley said it makes her think of referent power. Remind me again, what is referent power?
Based on the follower's identification and liking to the leader.
Yeah, so respect, right? The fact that why would people respect the Pope?
Because his message is simple and it's like easy for everyone to grasp, even though it's like so in depth. I like the word simple.
Mm-hmm. Very simple. One thing that I like that it says here, so it would be the 4th paragraph. It says soft power rests on the ability to shape the preference of others. So that connects right back to our definition of what it means to influence, right? We're getting people to do what we want given what's available. But they just kind of say it in a fancier way, to shape the preferences. Does the Pope have preferences for how he wishes his congregation and those who follow him would conduct themselves or things that they would do? Absolutely. So there's always that aspect of power. But then it says the essence of such influence was that it co-opts people rather than coerces them. So if we are saying that, okay, it appears Pope Francis has a type of referent power, that he's able to influence people's preferences based on the respect that they have for them, what would be the opposite power base of that? They kind of say it without realizing it, they're saying it. What would it be? What power base? Coercion. Yep, coercion. The coercion. Any other connections you can see in this 2-page article about power? Flip to the back and read that 2nd paragraph. It's really 2 sentences. If we were to go and have that conversation of leader versus manager, what does it appear this particular writer seems to see Pope Francis as? A visionary. So is he a leader or a manager? What would we label him as? A leader, because we say that a leader is focused on the future, which it requires setting goals, vision casting. A manager is more about keeping the status quo going, kind of organizing, directing what's happening. All right. Any other thoughts on power here? Read that last paragraph. What are your thoughts and reflections about the Pope and power from that last paragraph? So it says, second sentence there says, this one is teaching us, referring to the Pope, about the nature of power in a world where social media can create an intimate bond with even the grandest figure. So if we view someone as a leader because they're a figure, they have a position, they have a title, what type of power base is that person exerting or using? Legitimate. Does it appear that the Pope does the Pope have a legitimate power position? He's the dang Pope, for heaven's sakes, right? But it doesn't appear to be the power base he goes to first to try to influence what people do, right? So I think, this is a good article to tuck away as an example of how you can be reading things in the news, watching the news, watching TV clips, movie clips, and pulling out leadership concepts for them. So it may not, this article doesn't specifically mention the 5 power bases, but that word power could kind of tee you off to say, hey, let me look into this a little more. And you can start applying what you're learning about theory to the things that you're reading. What's cool, though, is that you can also use the theory that you're learning to say, they totally got this wrong. One of my favorite things to do is to read articles off of fastcompany.com. So it's a business-related website that has a lot of cool articles about leadership and management, so forth. And they'll be like, top 5 traits for effective leadership in 2020. But the things they list aren't traits. Like, once you know what trait theory is, you're like, those are virtues or those are values. Those things aren't traits or characteristics. So you can also, at the same time, not only find these articles that support what theory says, but you can also be like, someone's writing about things they don't know anything about. Does that ever happen? Yeah. And so again, don't forget that that is an extra credit opportunity in this class all semester long. You post it to the discussion board in our Canvas site, and that's something that y'all can be sharing with each other. So again, just kind of as you're paying attention to stuff going on around you, try to use that opportunity to apply. I can give y'all as much information in this class as I possibly can. I can give y'all opportunities to apply. But the moment that you can begin to make this content personal for yourself, that's when it's going to really start clicking. So you've got to kind of meet me halfway a little bit there and do that. To help us review a little bit before we dive into what exactly trait theory is, I am going to show y'all what the inside of my brain looks like, and it's a scary place most of the time. But I do want to share this because maybe for some of y'all this is going to be a helpful study tool. So have any of y'all ever done mind mapping or concept mapping? Nobody. This is going to be fun. I see a few people shaking their heads now. I'm a concept mapper. And what that means is that if I were to sit through this entire theory class and feel like it was just being taught linearly or like in order, things wouldn't connect for me. Things wouldn't make sense. I need to draw it out. I need to put arrows to where things connect, and helps me answer the question of why are we learning this? Or what does this have to do with the topic of this class? And it also keeps me it gives me that big picture of where we're at in the class. And so I've started a concept map up here on the board that I want y'all to help me finish. And again, this is something we're going to periodically do in class, but what I would like for y'all to do is not just copy down the concept map that I make, because again, this is the inside of my brain, but to make your own concept map. As you are learning these theories, these topics and concepts, when you're studying at home, that you try to do this yourself. It just kind of helps you put all of the pieces of the puzzle together. And the thing that you'll learn about studying leadership is that it's not a step-by-step process. And so having this concept map is going to help you see, we may go 3 steps forward, and then we're going to swing back around for a second, talk about motivation theory, and then we're going to go further 5 more steps a little bit. So it's going to help you kind of keep everything organized. So I start here on the board with what we said our definition of leadership is for this class. It's a process where an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. And if you remember, I said we're going to really break apart this definition all semester long. And the first place we're going to break this apart is we're going to talk about the individual. Who is this individual that we're talking about in the definition? And the first thing that we did last week is we said, well, first we need to define, is this individual a leader or is this individual a manager? And so this is where you can kind of make your notes concise. Again, kind of those like bullet point things that you want to remember when you're studying. And so, for instance, I put a leader is focused on the future. A manager is focused on status quo. There's a whole chart in your book of comparing the two. You can maybe include that in your notes of your concept map, or you can maybe just put the page number. So if you're studying, you know what page to reference. But it kind of gives you, again, just a quick summary of, okay, we're talking here, we need to define, is this individual a leader or are they a manager? How do we know the difference between those two? And then the next thing that we talked about is power. We had to say, okay, what does it mean when we influence someone? Ultimately, it means getting what you want, given what's available. So knowing, okay, power. Power is influencing. It's that process of how do we get people to do what we want, given what's available. Now there's 2 different types of power, kind of categories. Anybody remember what those 2 categories of power are? The power bases can either be this or they can be that.
Position power or personal power?
So we have position power and we have personal power. Okay, and then what did we say are the positional power bases?
Legitimate, reward, can you say that again, please?
The position. Legitimate is one, and what else? For position? And then what?
Is it
Let's think about it.
referent and expert?
Think about personal power bases. Let's do that side first. Okay, that may be easier.
Referent and expert.
So again, we can remember referent and expert are 2 type of power bases that are personal because we do things that people ask us because of who they are, not because of what position or authority they may have over you, okay? We respect them and we value their expertise, their competency in something. So what are the other 4 then that would be our positional?
Legitimate, reward, coercive, and information.
Very good. Coercive and information. Right? So people are able to use those power bases oftentimes because of the authority or the position that they may have. Now, the last key part to power that we talked about last week is we can't just talk about how we use power bases, we also have to be cognizant of what. If we're trying to influence people to do what we want to pay attention to what? Do they do it or not? Right? And we call that what? Starts with an R. Response is close. Reaction. Okay? So we have reactions to power. And there's 3. What are those 3 reactions to power? Commitment, compliance, and what? Resistance. And so again, if these were my notes, like this right here, this is everything we talked about on Thursday in a very concise manner. If these were my notes, I would say, okay, I'm going to draw an arrow. Which of the power bases lead to commitment? Anybody remember at least one of them? Referent. So I'd draw an arrow. And you might do that with all of them. Okay? Again, concept maps are just a way to take all this information that you've been getting, put it in a concise format, draw pictures. Maybe you're like, I call it the old school way of doing concept maps, but it's a legit way. You ever remember doing this in school? And then you like connect. Maybe that's what works for you. But again, this is how my brain works. Just a little insight to it, but hopefully this will be a tool that helps y'all this semester. And so we've kind of already gone over in the first week of class, just describing, defining, understanding what leadership is, who the leader is or who that individual is. We're talking about what it means to influence and actually how we do it, to then start saying, okay, now let's start talking about leadership. And we will start in chapter 2. The first thing that it gives us is kind of a historical view on where leadership theory started, where it's gone, and where we are currently. And it's really important that we take a look at this because we need to know, again, where we've been. And so leadership theory and kind of the study of leadership as a phenomenon, it started in the early 1900s. And honestly, the whole thing was focused on, well, what makes a good leader? And we call it great men theories. Why do you think we started with this idea of studying great men? And what is it about these men that make them good leaders? Who were leaders leading up to the 1900s? White males, men, in any culture. Most of the time up to that point, if you were in some position of power or authority, it was usually males. And so you think of Alexander the Great, you think of our presidents, what have you. And so kind of sociologists, psychologists, all these people that wanted to start studying leadership, really the only place they had to start were with these great men. And they said, what is it about them that makes them get into this position? You know, if we could look at Alexander the Great's life and figure out exactly what happened to him, all the situations he was in, who he was, what made him that way, maybe we could come up with a formula to kind of be able to predict when a child's born in those similar circumstances, when they have that similar personality or set of characteristics. We know he's going to be a great leader and we can kind of groom him up. That's where we started. And so everything focused on the characteristics that made leaders and how those were different from the people who weren't leaders at that current time. And then we kind of shift. We get more into traits and we start saying, okay, that doesn't give us all of the answers. right? We can't just look at who the leader is. We need to start saying, like, what are they actually doing? Because can people have good traits but not necessarily do good things? Sure, right? So we start adding in a little bit about the context. And then we say, okay, that's not working so much. And we actually revert back to more trait theory. And we started looking at it more. And imagine in a 70-year time period, there were a lot of studies done about traits and characteristics of effective leaders. So we were able to kind of compile them all together and say, well, was there any consistency there? And then we come around and we're like, some, but not a whole lot. There was also a lot of growth in psychology with personality. And so that kind of became part of trait theory. That was something new that we said, okay, beyond just like these traits, we also need to say, like, just who is the person in their personality? Like, is an extroverted person going to be a better leader than an introverted person? We'd never studied that before. So that's what they did there. And so that's where today we've kind of come at the end of what we say are the 5 major leadership traits. And what we mean by that is not that these are the 5 traits that guaranteed will mean someone is an effective leader. What we're saying is that over time, all of the research that we've been doing about traits of leaders, these are really the 5 that come up the most commonly. They're pretty consistent, but they're also not a formula per se. So we have intelligence, self-confidence, determination, integrity, and sociability. Why do you think these 5 traits are the ones that are pretty consistent across all the studies the past, let's just say the 70 years that this was kind of all done, all the research put together? Let's talk first about intelligence. Why would intelligence be included there?
You have to know about the topic that you're leading.
You've got to know about the topic, the people that you're leading, the context that you're in. Research shows us that we do have this expectation that the people who are leading us need to be smarter than us. Would y'all agree with that? Let me just be completely honest with y'all. If I have someone leading me that I don't feel like is very confident at what they're doing, or that I know more about something going on than what they do, they lose a little bit of referent power with me. That's just me personally. But I think that it's kind of common, whether we've like paid attention to it or noticed it before or not. The interesting thing, though, is we want our leaders to be intelligent. We want them to be smarter than we are, but not too smart. Why?
Then they just kind of talk over your head.
Then they just talk over your head. What's a class that y'all sit in that everything just goes, psh, and it's like even though that professor is trying to explain the concept to you, it's just psh. Chemistry. For me, it was organic chemistry, for sure. When I took that in college, like, that's why I'm not a pre-vet major. That's what I changed. But I mean, it just over my head, and they couldn't lead me well as a teacher because it was almost too much, right? So that's a really important thing to remember about this particular trait is we want people who are smart. We want people who are intelligent in the jobs or the positions of leadership that they're in, right? Because we want them to make good decisions, to know how to make those decisions, to have the right access to information. But we don't want them to be so intelligent that they can't relate back, right? There's this difference between intelligence and competency. Competency still implies some knowledge of whatever, but they're actually able to still do it. You've probably heard the phrase before, that person's really smart, has a lot of book smarts, but not a whole lot of common sense smarts. That's kind of what we're looking at. It's kind of like that balance beam that we're on when it comes to intelligence. Why do we want a leader who's self-confident? And maybe here's the question to go with that. Why is the trait self-confident and not inspiring?
they just have to be confident in what they're doing?
Just kind of have a confidence in what they're doing. To me, it's kind of about a person who, again, once that decision's made, they kind of stick to their guns and they move forward no matter, what kind of battles they come face with. We kind of expect a leader to have someone that shows that. And to me, that ties in a little bit with integrity, right? What does integrity mean? Upholding your values when nobody's watching. Okay? So it's that whole not having double standards or being hypocritical. If you say this is something you value, or if you say this is the way you are, or something that's important to you, it's important to you 24 hours a day, regardless of the number of people watching you or people behind the camera. Okay, so to me, those two kind of go hand in hand. Why do we want a leader who's determined or has determination?
Just simply complete whatever they're doing.
Complete what they're doing. To me, I like the word resilience, right? We want someone who's going to, again, kind of stick it through. We don't want a leader who, when times get tough, that they say, all right, peace out, y'all handle it. Y'all are about to really laugh at me. So my way of de-stressing the past few weeks with kind of everything going on is I've decided to start rereading Harry Potter. They came out, the first one came out when I was in 4th grade. I don't typically reread books, but I was like, I need something that's nonsense right now, and that's what I've been doing. And what I've also been doing is every time I read a book, I'm watching a movie. So I just finished watching the second movie, Chamber of Secrets. And, has anyone here not seen or read Harry Potter that's not going to have any idea what I'm referring to? Okay. So I'll explain. They have a particular wizard who teaches one of their classes that's supposed to be defense against the dark arts. So bad people, bad wizards, right? But this guy that gets hired this year, he has all these books out, right? And you would just think that he has conquered the world. He comes in very egotistic, like he's really handsome, and he's always ready for the photo op. But when it actually comes time to help Harry Potter fight off a dark wizard, he leaves. He just gets scared and leaves and runs out. And to me, that's what I think is the opposite of determination, is that this person, they just, when the going got tough, they just left. Literally left students to their own devices rather than being the adult in the situation and helping out. Okay, I will give no more Harry Potter references in class. Last one, sociability. This is an interesting word too that we use as a leadership trait. Why do we expect our leaders to be sociable? And again, why is the word sociable used instead of maybe extroverted? Because we assume extroverted means sociable, right? Why the difference? And why do we want a leader to be sociable?
Because we want them to get along with everybody they're trying to lead. Extroverted, sometimes they can't adhere to other people's needs when it comes to social settings. And so I think sociability fits a broader term of interacting with everybody that you're involved with.
Oh, you just hit the nail on the head. So extroversion, we'll get to it when we talk about personality, is really this desire. You get your energy from being around people. So it's a very self-seeking reason that you're around people, because that's how you get energized. That's how you fill your cup, per se. But sociability, it is. It's very easy as an extroverted person. You can be in a room full of people, but that doesn't mean you actually get to know everybody on a deep level. Sociability is more of that aspect of, I'm sociable. Doesn't matter who you are, the situation that I'm in, I'm willing to engage and get to know the people that I'm around. And that's going to be a key leadership trait when we start talking about relationships between leaders and followers, and how do we foster that. So again, those are the 5 major leadership traits that's kind of come out of research over time. And so it's important to know those. And again, we're not going to go over every slide in class, but y'all will have access to all of these. We've kind of already talked about them. Now, another form of how we talk about leadership traits or leader traits. We've talked about the characteristic side, and that's the big five, or what I wouldn't say big five, the 5 major traits. But then we have that new aspect that came out, kind of that second round of research that we started doing about leaders and leader traits, started focusing more on personality. And this is where we get the big 5 personality factors. Raise your hand for me if you've ever taken a personality assessment before, not including the one I had you do for class today. Okay, what type of personality assessment have you done?
I've done the Enneagram.
The Enneagram? What about you?
I did the strength.
Strengths Finder, absolutely. So if you've done Strength Finders or Clifton Strengths, that's a type of personality assessment. What else? Myers-Briggs, yep. Who maybe like in high school you did like colors? Like what color are you? Are you orange, gold, green, blue? I think is the 4th one. Anyone done colors before? Anyone done like the animals? Are you a lion or are you a monkey or like there are some silly ones out there. There's a ton on social media. I don't see them pop up as much anymore, but I would say the past couple years they were pretty popular. What I want y'all to know is not that those are bad. Some of them are pretty good. Clifton Strengths is really good. We use it in our own leadership program to kind of start talking about getting to know yourself and personal leadership. And what we mean about is it good, we're looking at 2 things. Is the research behind it, first off, is there even research behind it? Because I'm going to tell y'all there's a lot of personality assessments that are not based on research or any studies that have been done in the past. Someone just made up what they want to call personality and they put some questions together and y'all are paying for them, right? We don't want to do that. We don't want to waste our money. So we look at, was there research done to create this? And is it based on an actual theory about personality? And then we want to know, is it reliable? And what we mean by that is, if you were to take it multiple times, you would get the same result. It's like hitting a target. Okay, if I throw darts at a target, I'm pretty reliable. Regardless of where I hit on the target, if I hit in kind of the same spot over and over again, I can say, well, I've kind of got a reliable shot. May not be bullseye, but I'm reliable. And the third thing we look for is it valid? And what we mean by that is, are the questions that are in this actual assessment asking the right questions? So if I'm wanting to know if you're an extrovert versus an introvert, are the questions in the assessment even really related to that? There are some things that will ask you, like, what is your personality? And then you start to read the questions and they're really assessing your leadership traits, right? So we want personality assessments based off of theory and research that are reliable and that are valid. There's been a lot of issues with Myers-Briggs lately in the psychology world. So this is one, if you've ever done, it'll say, and there's a lot of these on the internet that are like condensed versions. So if you've ever done one that's like, I'm an INFJ, which is what I am, there's some issues there and you'd have to go through a ton of psychology to kind of understand that. And I'm not going to explain that today. But there's reasons why we don't particularly teach it or use it in our leadership program. What we do use is what y'all have taken, called the Big Five. This assessment was created in the early 90s, and it has been the most valid and reliable personality assessment that's ever been created. It is based off solid theory, and what I like about it is it always boils down to 5. Like, even when they try to add additional personality dimensions to it, those don't really fit. You can describe most people based off of where they fit on a spectrum for each of these 5 particular personality categories. And again, if you were to take this, and here's one thing I will say, if you were to take this assessment again tomorrow, your results day by day might be a little bit different. Why might that be? You're familiar with the questions. And so maybe you didn't like your results the first time. and you're like, oh man, this one says I'm neurotic. I don't want to be perceived as neurotic. So when those questions that you can kind of figure out are connected to neuroticism come up, you're like, I'm going to change my answers. And so you kind of don't actually answer it very accurately. It's usually not good practice to continually take personality assessments again, because just our brain, we're always going to start tweaking our answers a little bit. But what's interesting about the Big Five is, say that I were to have you take it today and then take it once every year, even though the comparison of year to year, there might be a little difference, over time, your results are going to be very stable. The little shifts that you may see are going to be insignificant, meaning that they don't really mean much. So, you may have been 2 points lower this year than you were last year on, let's say, openness. But over time, that 2 point difference that you kind of keep wavering on isn't really that big of a shift. So it's a very stable, reliable, and valid instrument. And so we like to use that because most leadership research that's done today that has any connection to personality is going to reference Big Five. And so the Big Five are neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. To remember these five, and again, this can get kind of confusing because we have the 5 major traits, and now we have the Big Five personality. I want you to rearrange those into the acronym OCEAN. So I'd write that in your notes. OCEAN. O stands for openness. And openness is this tendency to be informed, creative, insightful, curious. Now, normally, in a normal semester, we would all get up and we would kind of move around to see where everybody is on this spectrum. But we're not able to do that, so we're going to have to participate by a raise of hands, all right? When it comes to open-mindedness, and again, what I want y'all to know is these personality traits, it's not a you either have them or you don't. It is a spectrum, right? And so every individual, every person in this room is going to fall somewhere on the spectrum from 0 to 100 of where they lie when it comes to being open-minded or openness. And where you fall on that spectrum is going to describe your personality or your demeanor towards that type of behavior, okay? And there's not a right or wrong. Again, I want us to kind of get out of that binary thinking. There's not a right or wrong, and also there's not a specific formula we want to have for effective leadership, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So with openness, let's just say if you scored between a 1 and 40, raise your hand for me on openness. Okay. If you scored between 40 and 70, raise your hand. So we don't really have anybody in the middle. And then a 70 to 100. Okay, awesome. So if you're on that lower end of the spectrum, and this, y'all should on your printout kind of have some explanation of what all this means. But if you score low, you tend to be conventional, down to earth. Your interests, not that they're narrow, I don't like that they say that word narrow, but you have specific things you like, and that's what you focus on. And you don't tend to see yourself as the most creative person. Okay, would those of you who scored on the low end say that, yeah, that kind of accurately describes me? Those on the high end say that you tend to be original, creative, curious, complex. Does that feel like you? Okay. So then the next letter is conscientiousness. All right? Conscientiousness. This is all about being thorough, organized, controlled, dependable, decisive. How many of y'all could maybe have predicted your score before you even saw the readout of this? Yeah. So if you scored, let's kind of do that again. Low to high is 0 to 40. Raise your hand. Okay. And raise it high so I can see. Okay. 40 to 70. All right, and 70 to 100. All right, so we got Got a few more highly conscientious people in this class. High scores tend to be reliable, well-organized, self-disciplined, careful. Low scores tend to be disorganized, undependable, negligent. What were your thoughts when you saw your own personal outcome on conscientiousness? Was there anyone who was like, oh, that's not me? Okay, let's think. Third one, E, extroversion. So again, if I could change the words, I wouldn't use the word extroversion. I would insert the word sociability here. But this is the word that these particular researchers chose to use. Who in here scored between a 0 and 40? 40 to 70? Okay. 70 to 100. Man, to have so many of y'all that are highly extroverted, y'all don't talk a lot in this class. I'm just kidding. High scores tend to be sociable, friendly, fun-loving, talkative. Low scores tend to be introverted, reserved, inhibited, quiet. I score literally a 40 on the dot. And so for me personally, this one, I'm like, I'm introverted, I'm reserved, quiet, but I'm not inhibited. Like, I'm not one of those that's like shy. I think of that word as shy. I'm not a super shy person. Were there any words in the description of how you scored that maybe you didn't agree with for yourself? Are all people who are highly extroverted friendly? No. Right. A, agreeableness. Tendency to be accepting, conforming, trusting, and nurturing. Who scored 0 to 40 on this one? Anyone get lower than 7? I have a 6 on this one. All right, who's 40 to 70? Okay, and 70 to 100. Okay, anyone have higher than 90? Okay, so 90, higher than 90? No. So Bailey, tell me, how does agreeableness describe you? What was your score overall?
It was like a 92. I forgot what the first one. And I don't know, I don't like confrontation, and I like everyone being happy and loved, and I feel like that's my way. I'm like, oh, I don't really totally agree, but I'm like, I'll accept you for whatever.
Yeah, so people who score high on agreeableness, they tend to be good-natured, sympathetic, forgiving, courteous. Low scores tend to be critical, rude, harsh, and callous. I don't know if I agree with all those words about myself, but in bold it says for me, you find it easy to criticize others. I will say, for those of you who have done Clifton Strengths, one of my key strengths is analytical. Being analytical requires criticism, looking at things and saying, what's wrong? How can we make it better? So I'd be like, yeah, I tend to do that a lot. So unfortunately, that's me. But I try to do it in a sympathetic way and to be good-natured. The last one, neuroticism. Your book calls it neuroticism. This particular assessment calls it negative emotion. I like negative emotion better. Neuroticism. I was fixing to make a joke about my mom, but I won't do it. Okay, so neuroticism is the tendency to be depressed, anxious, insecure, vulnerable, and hostile. Let's go with the negative emotion piece. If you are 0 to 40, raise your hand. Okay. 40 to 70. Okay. 70 to 100. All right. So if you score on that high end, this is the only one that you want to flip-flop your results. So instead of if you score high, that doesn't mean that you have a positive emotion. That means that you are high in negative emotion, okay? So you want to make sure you interpret that correctly. So if you have that high score, you tend to be nervous, maybe high strung, insecure, you worry a lot. I scored a 65. I'm going to be honest with y'all. I'm a worrier. That's like the thorn in my side. And I suffer from anxiety. I honestly do. If you are a lower score, you tend to be more calm, relaxed, secure, hardy. Who in here scored low again? 0 to 40? Anyone have under 20? Okay, this is not uncommon in college classes. Being in college enacts some little bit of anxiousness sometimes to people, and so it's very rare among your demographics, your age group, whatever, for you to have a really low negative emotion score. So just kind of take that with what it is. Overall, do you feel like this accurately describes your personality?
I don't know, I think this makes me seem very intense, and I guess I really am actually, because my like extroversionness is 94, but also is my negative energy is 94. So I'm just a hot mess.
Yeah.
It's okay though.
You're not a hot mess. You're who you are.
Yeah.
Okay? Again, we've got to get out of that thinking of like, oh, you know, I scored really high on negative energy, so that must mean that I'm a hot mess. No. Do we need people who do worry and who are a little bit anxious about things? People who are on the opposite end of the spectrum, don't you sometimes prefer working in groups with those type of people? Because if it wasn't for them, you might just kind of let things go, not pay attention to stuff. Right? There are positive aspects to all pieces of these personality traits. All right? And so again, remember these big 5. And it's helpful to remember where you are to know kind of where you feel. Now, I told you that there's not a particular, formula that we want to say, well, if you're high in this, low in this, low in this, high, low, boom, we've got the most effective leader. But we do have what we call some correlations. And so that just simply means relationships. If we were to rate the effectiveness of a leader and then look at maybe how that leader scored on these particular 5 traits, we can see some correlations there. And so one of the first things is that there is a strong personality trait there is a strong connection, a strong relationship between these personality traits and leadership. So for instance, extroversion. It's pretty strongly associated with leadership. Okay, so if we were to walk into Ag Hall and we were to give the big 5 to Dr. Kuhn, who is our dean, and then you were to interview or give an assessment to all the faculty in Kasner. Do we call ourselves Kasner anymore? I don't know how this works because I don't know what the acronym for Ferguson College of Ag is yet. So we're going to just keep saying Kasner today. But all the faculty in Kasner that we said, okay, is Dr. Kuhn an effective leader? Yes or no? All right? We could do some statistics and we could see there that if Dr. Kuhn scored highly on extroversion or on sociability, he's more likely to be considered an effective leader. Could there be any biases there? Just because we say someone might be effective because they are sociable or extroverted doesn't mean that that person is effective, because there is some personal bias there. We've been groomed in our culture to value that, right? So that's just something to think about. The statistics may say it's true, but we have to kind of pay attention to what may be our cultural biases behind that. Do all cultures value extroversion? Can anyone give me an example of a culture or situation where extroversion is not valued, but introversion maybe is? In a lot of, go ahead.
A monk.
A monk. Perfect example. So monks are valued for being introspective, reflective, thinkers, only speak when you have something important to say, right? And so just because a monk may not talk a lot, the people that they lead may consider them effective leaders. So again, we have to take some of this stuff and take our kind of Western lens off of it and realize that maybe this doesn't always apply to every culture that we talk about. Okay? Conscientiousness. This is probably the second most related factor with effective leadership. But what's interesting is it's not so much about, okay, if someone's highly conscientious, are they going to be an effective leader? It's more connected with followers and saying if a follower is highly conscientious, then they're probably going to score higher or be rated higher on their job performance by their supervisor. To me, this one makes a lot of sense. Why, as a boss, do we want followers who are conscientious? Again, this is kind of a bias. But if someone is dependable, organized, what is that going to mean to us as a business?
That they'll do their job.
That they'll do their job, which is going to mean you're going to be more productive, make more money, right? So we want those things. We don't necessarily sometimes want the people who are maybe a little bit more creative and not as organized, because that seems to take more time, right? Again, kind of in our culture, we want efficiency, we want productivity, we want earnings at the end of, profit at the end of things. And so in our particular culture, we highly value conscientiousness, and so therefore that's going to relate to higher performance evaluations. On openness would be the next one. So same thing, the more open you are, the more you are likely to be rated as an effective leader. And we kind of talked about that with the traits and that idea of sociability. Oftentimes, the more open-minded you are, the more willing you are to establish relationships with people who aren't like you, to consider ideas that maybe you've never thought about before. And so when we think about what leadership is, or what we expect a leader to do to support change, to think about the future, open-mindedness is a key part of that personality demeanor that helps someone do that. Low neuroticism. So research has shown over time that you're considered a more effective leader if you show lower levels of negative behavior. The interesting thing about that is, are there some things we can do to kind of swing our personality on that? For those of us who scored maybe high on that, can we have less negative behavior, or what is perceived as negative behavior? Yes, no. I mean, I can do some things personally to help me curb anxiety, to help curb worrying, but sometimes we just are who we are. And then what's interesting is we make this assumption with agreeableness, that the most effective leaders are going to be the ones who are the most agreeable. And what we know is that that's only a teeny tiny bit true. There's actually not a strong relationship between effectiveness as a leader and whether you're agreeable or not. What would be the benefit of having a leader who's agreeable? And again, you can kind of look back at that definition of what it means to be agreeable. What's the benefit to having someone who's highly agreeable?
It could like help like your followers like be more encouraged to like speak up for new ideas, like innovative thinking, because they wouldn't get thought down, I guess.
Yeah. So just being good-natured, sympathetic, it may create a welcoming environment, likability, right? But what would be a negative to having a leader who's highly agreeable?
They're not really leaving at that point. They're just conforming to everybody's ideas about like true direction for the goal.
Trying to make everybody happy, right? And we talked about that idea with the traits, the characteristics, that we want someone who's dependable, right? and who has some self-confidence. Sometimes highly agreeable people have a really hard time making tough decisions. Bailey, can I pick on you?
Yes.
Does this describe you?
Yes.
You know, and in a leader, that's not maybe something that we want all the time. Now, I'm not saying that if a person's highly agreeable, they're not an effective leader, because there's a very weak association there. But I'm just saying we have this tendency to always kind of jump to that, again, like positive connotation of a word, and that because it's agreeableness sounds good, that's what we want. That's not always the case. And so we have to, again, think about that situation that the leader's in. And, you know, maybe we actually want a leader who's maybe on the lower side of agreeableness. And what I mean by that is that once a decision's made, they're going to be a little hard-headed about it. But we kind of want that because we want a leader who's also determined, right? So something to kind of think about there as we look at these 5 personality traits. So to help us review for today, we're going to fill in the rest of our concept map for today. Let me get the screen turned on. All right. So I said, you know, the first thing is that we've described what leadership is. We've talked a little bit and set the stage for how we're going to talk about leaders and the leadership process. So now we're going to start talking about how we study leadership. And the first place we started with is trait theory. And a good reminder of what trait theory is all about. I should have left some more room. I'm going to write it here. Trait theory is about who the leader is. So all the research that's done in trait theory is about describing who the leader is, who that individual is in our definition, okay? That's where we started. Easiest place to start, right? Looking at a person and trying to describe them. And we do that in 2 different ways. We look at the characteristics of a person, and we look at their personality. So there's kind of 2 sections of trait theory. And when we looked at the characteristics, the first thing that we described were what? We kind of went through that history of the researcher's trait theory, and what did we end up with?
Different types of power.
Nope, we got power over here. What's the very first thing we kind of covered today when it came to trait theory? And I said we're going to get a little confused because we're going to have 2 sets of 5 today. The 5 major leadership traits. So 5 major traits. And can y'all remind me what those 5 are? Intelligence. Smarter than us, but not too smart. Next. Self-confidence. Confident in what they're doing, but not cocky. 3. Integrity. Uphold their values, even when no one's around. 4. Determination. So a sense of resiliency, even when things get hard. And the last one. Sociability. Okay. Because the personality side has an acronym, for me, like remembering these big 5 major traits, kind of come up with an acronym myself to remember it. This is going to be silly. The S squared, D, I squared. So there's going to be 2 words that start with an S, a word that starts with a D, and 2 words that start with an I. Okay? So if you were given a quiz or an exam that you've got to identify what these 5 major traits are, start coming up, come up with some ways for you to remember these things. There's a little bit of memorization that's required with studying leadership theory because you just got to know. You got to know what these 5 traits are, okay? But that's one way that I came up with to remember it. And you could do S squared, I squared, D, or however. But that usually kind of gives a cue to my brain to remind me, oh yeah, that's what those words are, rather than just staring at a blank page, okay? So we talked about the traits, and we said, okay, there's 5 major traits. Then we said, now we're going to go into this other camp, personality. And what personality theory did we talk about today? That you took an assessment of. The Big 5. And so to remember the Big 5 personality traits, what's the acronym we use? Ocean. And what does the O stand for? Openness. C. E. Extroversion. A. And N. Neuroticism or negative behavior. For me, I would accept either of those words depending on which one you want to use. So we've already kind of taken a dive into saying we can describe who the leader is by identifying which of these 5 characteristics they have out of the 5 traits. Or we can start looking at their personality. Does this leader, where do they fall on the spectrum for each of these personality dimensions? Now, next time we meet on Thursday, we're going to look at one more personality theory called EQ, or emotional intelligence. Any of y'all learned anything about emotional intelligence before? It's really cool. And it's going to be one of those things kind of like power, that once we talk about it and learn some more about it, we're going to pull it up a lot because there's a lot there, and it describes what I would say is kind of the human nature overall and how we interact with other people. And so for next time, you already have your second homework due on Thursday, and posted in Canvas is an EQ assessment. I'd like for you to take that assessment, upload your results into Canvas, and bring your results with you on Thursday. This particular assessment is not going to give you your score, and it's not going to tell you how to score it. So it's very important that you bring it to class with you on Thursday, because I'm going to be the one walking y'all through on how to score it. Okay? Let me make sure I've got no other announcements for you. Nope, I think y'all are good. Again, one thing I would encourage y'all to do too is just as you're going back over your notes this week, see what you can find that talks about maybe leadership traits or leader personality. There's a lot of stuff out there because this tends to be where most people camp out when they talk about leadership and they don't go any further. All right? So see what y'all can find and post it to the discussion board. It'd be interesting for us to kind of talk about some of those things in class as y'all post them. Any questions that y'all have for me or for Aaron? The last little bit